Say hi. Say hi.
I'm saying hi.
All right. Hi, everyone. We're hoping that you can hear us and see us. We're going to jump right into it. Why is news biased? And joining us is the Regis to my Kathy Lee, Lynn.
Are you sure?
My husband.
Are you sure I'm not the Kathy Lee to your Regis?
The Kathy Lee to my Regis, Lynn. And I hope that this is working.
Yeah, we'll see here.
But I don't. Oh wait, here it is. Here it is. Okay, here we go. Because we've had
it's got Chaka on there.
Some microphone issues, so we're just making sure that the audio is okay. It sounds good. Woohoo! We figured it out. Okay, so welcome to the channel, everybody. Oh, hey, sorry. That's what happens when you bring the control booth into the actual studio. And we're turning it down. All right, so today we were talking about is news bias and why. And Lynn trains law enforcement in bias. He doesn't train them to be biased. It's the opposite.
I don't train them in bias at all, really.
Explain what you do.
I train law enforcement in human terrain mapping and behavior pattern recognition. So I teach law enforcement how to be able to make observations of the human terrain using artifacts and evidence of human behavior to articulate their decisions. So the intent of the training is to use actual fact-based observations that you can base off of science.
Right.
As to this is why I made my decision versus I have some implicit bias over here as to why I even made this contact. Because that's what it's gotten to now is the questions that'll happen is, officer, why did you even make the stop? What was your probable cause? What was your reasonable suspicion to make the stop? And the argument that will be is that, well, you knew my client was X, Y, or Z, and that's why you stopped him, and it didn't have anything to do with the fact that they actually, either committed a crime or appeared to have committed a crime or had some sort of evidence to that. So that's what we talk about. But we do explain or express what happens with bias, and it is something that people should be aware of. But bias is a human condition.
Right. So just real fast, if you're new to the channel, I am a television news reporter. I work for the NBC affiliate in Seattle. I've been doing this for about 13 years, but in mainstream media for 15. Lynn, his background is not that. We wish.
I know who I am.
Oh, God.
I'm the dude playing a dude disguised as another dude. No.
This is why we usually don't go live together. No.
I know, because I'm a loose cannon, and I'm not going to do what everybody thinks I'm going to do.
Jen says hi.
And flip
hi,
out.
Jen.
Oh, hey, Jen.
Okay.
Hell yeah.
So, Lynn was in the Marine Corps.
We don't have the bleeper, so I better be careful.
Yeah,
we don't
careful.
Get the bars and tones.
Lynn was in the Marine Corps for 12 years, and you were part of some special training and a new program, I guess, with the military that gave you this special knowledge and how to think through stuff.
Yeah, I was a part of the human terrain programs within the military to train very young Marines and soldiers how to be able to identify these things very rapidly on a battle space. And ironically, where all this stemmed from originally was from law enforcement and the experiences in law enforcement. And the reality is people are people. People are the same everywhere you go in the world. And good guys act like good guys no matter where you go, and bad guys act like bad guys no matter where you go. So on that premise, the observation always starts with what's the same? What is the norm? What is the expected set of conditions, right? So, you have to look at it from the thought process, and I think the average person could stand to maybe take this kind of idea into effect as well. Is that you're driving in your car, if you're being stopped, for example, by a law enforcement officer, they don't really know who's in the car. They can run your plates, most certainly, but they don't know if that's you driving your car. They don't know, it has nothing to do with, race, culture, politics, religion, any of that, as far as your behavior. Because you can see the same behaviors in a human being across the map. So they have to solely base their decisions off of the behavior of the driver when they make the approach, make the stop. Average stops go a certain way. So if you look at it the same way as, think about the time whenever you've been stopped or pulled over by a police officer, How do you behave? How do you act? How do you feel? I know for me, the first thing goes, oh man, there's cherries and berries in my rearview mirror. How long have they been back there? And golly, I hope they're going after somebody else and they're not pulling me over. And then when I realize they're pulling me over, I'm like, oh wow, how long have they been back there behind me? So there's certain expected conditions that you won't see, but the thing is that officer, when they make the approach to the vehicle and they're standing at the window of your vehicle, they have only so much time to make a decision as to, is this just going to be a routine traffic stop where, hey, sir, ma'am, you did X, Y, or Z, or you failed to do X, Y, or Z, or you were driving too fast for the conditions, whatever the case may be, or is that person having the worst day of their life and they're deciding, you know what, that's it, I'm not going to jail today, and then you see things like that happen. So.
When you said cherries and berries, as someone who wants to be a farmer, I for some reason thought you were talking about Charlie's Produce behind you. No.
Mm-mm.
That's blue and red.
Yeah, I'm talking about the lights.
So,
light bars.
Lynn is traveling a lot, but when he's in town, and I try to do these live trailer talks on Sundays, I'm trying to get more consistent with it. And since Lynn's here, we thought this would be a good opportunity to talk about how our careers intersect in the realm of bias. As a television news reporter who is in local news, I should say, I will happily address any questions that people have about bias, because I think it's really important nowadays. There's a growing distrust of mainstream media, and I can absolutely understand why. In fact, one of the more recent polls that I read, 70% of Americans do not trust mainstream news. So I think it's bad form for the mainstream news to stick their head in the sand about this issue, because if you don't address it, it is not going away. In fact, as you say, bad news does not get better with time.
No.
So what I'm trying to do with the channel, as we move into this Airstream that we're sitting in right now, and off-grid-ish, starting our own family homestead, as someone who's been in the media for a while and may be in the media, who knows, ask me whatever you want. Leave a comment. If you don't see this live, still leave me a comment, and then in the next trailer talk, I will try to address whatever questions you have. Like, open book. Whatever you wanted to know about mainstream news, ask away. So, obviously, when it comes to national news, it's a little bit different than local news. National news has sort of figured out a particular audience subset that they want to attract. And I would say, though some or any or all of them have sometimes information that's true, you may withhold certain facts that are aligned with whatever particular political party or demographic you want to attract. So say you're a left-leaning news outlet, you're going to maybe not necessarily lie and say stuff that's not true, but you probably are going to withhold the information that might balance it out from the right, and vice versa on the right side. I think it's a fair criticism for people to say that a lot of mainstream national news tends to lean left. I think this is because a lot of people who go into journalism happen to vote Democrat, and they all end up in the same newsrooms together, and they confirm each other's bias. So in local news, I think sometimes that happens as well. There are a lot of people who tend to be more aligned on the left, and fewer voices that feel comfortable speaking on the right. And though all of those people may be well-meaning, when you're only talking to people who think exactly the way you do, unfortunately, you end up in an echo chamber, and you may or may not realize how that bias, confirmation bias, for instance, you're looking for what you want to see, and then you end up repeating that. And that can become a problem, not just because from the bias perspective of people who, like, of course there are going to be folks, like you say, there are always going to be sort of the bad folks out there that just maybe they don't want to try. I would say that's very rare in my industry, in the local news perspective. Again, I'm talking local news right now. I think most of the people I work with are very well-meaning individuals, and have over the years worked with very great people and some really stellar journalists. I think in the times when the bias comes out, it may not necessarily be because you're, yes, Lynn?
Nothing.
Okay.
I'm listening.
Sorry, I'm feeling the need, so I wanted to say. Anyway, if you're in local news and that kind of thing is happening, it may or may not be because you have not a whole lot of time to think through what it is that you're working on, and that can become a problem, because I've said on these trailer talks before that if you have 4 hours to put a story together, it can be really difficult to just get the thing on the news, much less make sure you've gone through all your ducks to make sure that you know all the different sides.
Well, I think there's a big difference too between having a limited amount of time to get all the information out versus specifically cherry picking information to, guide something in a certain direction. And so I think there is a very big difference in that. And Jen said, agreed, national, aka network news, and local news are two entirely different entities.
Yeah.
Tough to compare.
Well, in the last trailer talk I did, I called it skin in the game. Do you have skin in the game? And I think the difference really is that in a local news environment, they have skin in the game because they live in the communities. They know a lot closer to them what's going on. They happen to have relationships with the local community. It's just, you're not always if you're in a national news environment, you live in New York and something happened in Wisconsin and you didn't have anybody there, you're just sort of taking the word for whoever was there, and you're hoping that one person or maybe two people knows what they're talking about. In local news, we have people who are at the city council meetings, who are knocking on people's doors, who are walking the streets, who are making the phone call, who know directly and have a vested interest in making sure that they really understand the complexities of the issues, because we live here. So we definitely don't want to get run out of town.
And I think that actually kind of brings to a point. It's what is the available information that you have to make an observation. Mm-hmm. A good example of that is I've done a lot of traveling to South Africa, and it's amazing how you'll go to somewhere like a somewhere very far away, and their opinions based on what is going on somewhere else is solely based on the news that they watch. And there's these assumptions or expectations that things are one way, and then when somebody talks to you and you're like, oh, well, I thought this was going on and this was happening, and you're like, no, it's not like that at all. So if you're trying to sip basically out of a fire hydrant through a coffee stirring straw, you're only going to get so much of that information. The information you have, based on your perspective, will guide you into what is your reality. Mm-hmm. So, when you talk about biases, and in my realm, in the stuff that we do, in the training that I'm into, as far as I know right now, there's approximately 14 different cognitive biases that exist. The biggest ones, the two main ones that we'll talk about within cognitive biases, are explicit bias and implicit bias. Implicit bias, which is implied bias, or it's subcognitive. It's unconscious. You don't realize it. It just happens. It's a survival mechanism within the brain. Explicit bias, well, we all know what explicit bias is. It's just like if you were back in the day, remember when they had the CD warning labels come out and it's like, oh, there are explicit lyrics here on this thing. You would know that is very loud and proud. I feel this way or that way. Again, nothing wrong with that. The only time that becomes an issue, for example, if you were to say, oh, Ford trucks suck and I like Chevy, so Chevy trucks are just better. Okay, that's fine. That's an opinion. You're opining something. That's one thing. If I make a decision, though, if I use the classification, though, that because you drive a Ford truck, now, for example, in our parlance, like I'm a law enforcement officer, if I pull you over because you're driving a Ford truck, well, that's a problem. I'm using that as a decision-making, a part of my decision-making algorithm. Sometimes we don't, or majority of times, we don't think about that stuff. There's a guy, Dr. Donald Hoffman. There's a TED Talk on it. You should check it out. And it talks about the Australian, one of the examples he uses, I believe it's the Australian jewel beetle. I could be wrong. But the beetle bases its reproduction off of characteristics and classifications. The female jewel beetle is much larger than the male, round, brown, and has a stippled backside, right? Well, there's another animal in the Australian outback called the Australian male, and they like to drink beer. And when they're done with their beer, as he tells the story, they throw their beer bottles out, and it wouldn't be... You can check this out. Look it up online. Search Google Images, and you will see like photos of these Australian beer beetles surrounding these empty beer bottles on the side of the road because they think it's a female.
They call them the Australian beer beetle?
No, I call it the Australian beer beetle, but it's actually, I believe it's the jewel beetle is the name of the beetle.
But the beetle tries to mate with the beer bottle
because the beer bottle satisfies and so what this doctor's talking about is that in nature does not thrive based off of logic. Nature thrives based off of characteristics that aid it in survival, and that's how things evolve. And so therefore those males that are unable to differentiate between the beer bottle and the beetle therefore will not mate and therefore will not procreate, and then that section of the genome pool will not move on. So it's a there's very much an ecological side to it, but it's your brain does not work that way. Your brain is constantly sampling your environment, and there's all kinds of things that occur within your brain in order for you to be able to deal with that massive amount of information. And sometimes what your brain will do, there's a condition called adaptation. It's good to improvise, adapt, and overcome. This is not that kind of adaptation. There's adaptation where your brain will actually the diminishing sensory response is what happens, and you will stop receiving information. I'll give you a great example of that. There's a lot of people out there that I'm sure have experienced this, where you've driven home after a long day of work, and we'll just say that the drive was anywhere from a half hour to a 45-minute long drive, right?
And you do not remember anything that happened.
You don't remember a single thing. You get home and you realize, like, oh my God, I don't remember a single thing that happened on that whole drive.
True story. Sometimes this happens to me on one block, and I will literally turn around, drive the block again to make sure I didn't run over a squirrel, turn back around, and continue on my merry way.
Squirrel.
This happens.
But so that's the point. Your brain is dealing with so much information,
right,
and it's only chunking the information that is most important for its survival. So when people base their decisions off of what their brain gears as most important to their survival. So this will probably upset a few people out there, but bias is not a complete and total bad thing. That's how our species has survived for as long as it has. Now, it is a bad thing, though, when that bias leads towards discrimination or improper decision making. And that's why there's systems in there. Now, the systems are, like, for example, our justice system is not the most perfect system in the world, but it is a system, and we utilize it to the best we can. And I think most recently is how this all kind of ties together into a bow is, you look on my end of the story where we're looking at law enforcement and their role in it in the criminal justice system, but there's a whole nother side to the criminal justice system in the legalities and the criminal side of it, and the prosecuting attorneys and defense and judges and juries and things like that. And that's why within the system, for example, if you're going to a jury trial, those jurors are not, during deliberations, are not allowed to watch the news. They're completely cut off because their perspective could be swayed based on things that are being done and said in the media.
Yeah.
And that's why you hear all this discussion about, the court of public opinion and things like that.
Yeah.
And we're seeing how, like, there's all this political, outrage, and there's this, all these people are socially outraged about things, and then the facts come out as they do, but now it's swayed and switched everything around so much, it's tainted. The information is tainted, and nobody can now legitimately say that, well, the decision's punishment or lack thereof, is it right, is it wrong? Well, we couldn't know, because it's like Schrodinger's cat. As soon as you open the box, you know what the cat is, but
So
an issue.
if we allow for the call it a fact that people just have bias, and maybe bias in and of itself is not negative or positive, it just exists. What do you do if you're in a profession like I am, which is telling the truth, or you're in a similar position where you're law enforcement and you have a lot of power too, as it relates to how you see reality.
Mm-hmm.
You said something to me like, that's where the facts come in, like where, so how do you work on your brain like that? If you're somebody who's in law enforcement or you're a journalist, what are some of your steps?
It's tough. Like when we're talking about law enforcement officers, they literally have milliseconds at times to make a decision. And sometimes that decision results in use of force or deadly force. And there's a lot of classic examples about that. But I think the first part to go to that is, well, what is truth? Right? What is truth to a person?
Question.
So when you look at, I could break it down quickly, and this might go over, some people are like, wow, what is in that can that he's drinking from? But, there's roughly, visually, we were bombarded with about 10 quadrillion bits of information visually per second. Out of that, there's, let's see here, it's 72,000 bits of information per second between both eyes, 36,000 bits of information between each eye. It's going back to our perceptual cortex, which is upside down and backwards. And then that's being compared to our 4 Fs, which is feed, fight, fornicate, and flee. So I look at this and I go, okay, do I need to fight it? Does it make me angry, or is it threatening? Are you threatening me? Do I need to run away from it? Is it going to kill me? Well, I don't know. I've never been killed before by an aluminum can. Of course, we've almost been blown up by water bottles. So there is that. Can I fornicate with it? Well, no, I'm not even going to go there. But ultimately, I make the decision to feed off of it. But if it doesn't match those 4, then I compare that prototypically to things I've experienced before in my file folders or my hippocampus, and I compare that to things I've seen or done before. And if all of a sudden it comes up and goes, whoo, I saw that once on National Geographic, and it didn't turn out too well for that guy, now my amygdala, which helps me sense make danger, becomes engaged and starts activating my adrenal cortex, and all those catecholamines and adrenaline and all this other stuff comes into play. All of this stuff is happening like that. And your amygdala is sending 10 to 50,000 responses out like that based on a decision. And that's why you have a perfect, I forget the name of the kid, but in what was it, Sacramento? The kid who was running from the cops, and he ended up having a cell phone or something, and cops went gun, and they shot the kid. Amadou Diallo in New York, same thing. Amadou Diallo was, there were some guys, some law enforcement officers that were following him. They thought he appeared to be, I believe, a suspect in a sex assault type case. They were going up to make contact with him. All he knows is like, dude, I'm in a rough part of the neighborhood, and these guys are coming up on me pretty quick, and he's trying to get to the keys to his door or whatever. He turns around, they see the keys, one officer thinks it's a gun and yells gun. He falls, another officer has a negligent discharge, so all the officers hear gun, hear a shot, see an officer fall. What do you think they put together? Your reality. All right, cognitive reality, what you see as reality, you only need 60 to 80% of the available information for your brain to go, that's real. So when you think about that, well, 60 to 80%, that's, that's a pretty wide range, first of all, and we're not even close to 100%. So your perception, you hear the saying, perception is reality. The first impression is the greatest impression, because if I perceive you to be X, Y, or Z, then that sticks with me the longest. And it takes much longer to change that visual perception because you don't see with your eyes. That's the big point of all this. You don't see with your eyes, you see with your brain. And so if you can imagine putting yourself in the position, once again with law enforcement officers, they receive a reporting party sends a call for service saying, hey, there's a guy in the park with a gun, right? Well, already your brain, you're as if you were making that contact, going to make that contact, you're already predisposed. Like, okay, there's a guy in the park with a gun, whatever. You show up to the park, and it's a kid, but he's got a gun, and he points the gun at you, and so what are you gonna do? You know, that's a hard decision to make. And once again, things like that have happened, where people have been shot with toy guns, and there's actually been criminals who've used fake guns to go complete a commission of a crime because, well, I couldn't go. I'm a felon. I can't get a gun, but I'll get a fake like BB gun or a pellet gun, and it looks real enough. Well, if an officer approaches you and you have something that looks like a gun, then there's a good chance, like especially if it's scotopic or nighttime conditions, and there's all these other things going on, they could go to most deadly and use force on you. So, you know, if you have nothing to lose and you're, you know, hey, I didn't do anything wrong and so on and so forth, then let it play out. Just comply. But and we're kind of jumping around to different kind of topics here, and I apologize for that. But the point is like you're seeing the two extreme ends of what is perception and what is reality, and factor that against truth.
Well,
and sometimes those things don't exactly always meet in the middle.
And one thing that I think consistently comes up in what you do and what I do is time. And so I've sat in some of your classes, and you talk a lot about trying to slow down, like the tactical pause, because I think in my industry we could also use some tactical pauses. The problem is that we're not in situations where we're making decisions in 3 seconds, but we are making decisions in 3 hours about information, that a lot of information about what the truth is of some very complex topics, and
what happens if
harder.
You miss the scoop?
Yeah, and we all want to be first, and that's the other thing too. Get to be on Twitter first and break the news, and you know, no longer is there just a 6 o'clock newscast, so everybody has till 6 o'clock to figure it out. It's like, if you got to break it, you got to break it now on Twitter, on digital, whatever. And I think that race to be first is not helping the race to be right all the time. And for some reason, it's just, you know, people can backtrack and they feel okay with that. Though it'll be interesting to see what happens after this lawsuit filed on behalf of remember the MAGA teens?
Oh, yeah.
And if you go look, just Google MAGA kids, and I'm sure you'll figure it out. But anyway, there was that issue where originally these kids in Washington, D.C. were, all the Twitter storm was about how they had accosted a Native American man at a rally, and it turns out
who was also a Vietnam veteran.
Yeah, well, and I think that there was something about that too that ended up being like maybe true or not true. I'm not sure, but there were a lot of details that were not available at the beginning, and then the story totally flopped at the end, and then people were deleting their tweets, and their attorneys basically like, no more of this. Like, we're filing a lawsuit so that if you go on Twitter and you defame someone, or you go on news and you defame someone and it's totally false, there's going to be some kind of accountability. It'll be interesting to see what happens with that case, because that could change the way that we do our jobs. I don't know. And there should be some accountability for us. I mean, I've always said that I get to turn to something else tomorrow for my job, but you don't. So like, I'm telling your story, you live with whatever I do. Even though I move on to a new story tomorrow, you got to live with how I tell your story. So, but that's an internal compass that I carry around with me. And, I mean, I think most people in my profession really, and I don't, I think you probably say this about law enforcement, most people actually are really trying to do the right thing. Oh, yeah. But there are just so many different struggles. And unfortunately, in my profession, we haven't always done the best job calling out and keeping accountable those who aren't doing a great job. And so that's sort of why I was trying to do these trailer talks, just going, full disclosure on whatever it is that people are interested in knowing, because I think the beginning of the conversation of regaining trust is just telling you what you want to know and how it works, and opening the books. Just like we talked when we, got married, it was like the financial thing, like, show me yours, I'll show you mine, and with finances, and, see where we all are, so that I don't have to worry about you, you don't have to worry about me. I mean, secrecy is where sickness begins. That's how I look at it anyway. Well,
and then there's also the side of it of being open. She was saying the guy never actually went to Vietnam.
Jen said he never went to Vietnam, but he may have been in the military. We don't know.
During the time. But that's like, it's going Tropic Thunder. The dude in one of the main characters in the movie, he never actually went to Vietnam or lost his arms, but he wrote a book about it. But
that whole story just was representative of like so many different things. Like there was the Black Hebrew Israelites. They were taunting the kids. I mean, it would just spun out of control. It's a great example of how quickly things just went from one to the other. The Jussie Smollett case is another example. We won't even get into that one of just like, okay, and everybody is ready for a fight. You know, it's like everybody is ready for a fight right now. So does your story make me want to fight? Okay, I got it. And I'm going to tweet it and I'm going to virtue signal. I want to make sure everybody knows that I got my team and we're ready to go. And just because people are looking for a fight. And so unfortunately, those are the stories that end up front and foremost.
Well, I would argue they're not looking for a real fight.
No, social media fighting is not real.
No.
No.
That's a fight you can walk away from.
I truly am convinced that most people who say nasty things on social media would never say that to somebody's face. Never.
I would love it, actually.
No, you wouldn't.
If it was like
I wouldn't.
old Wild West days, I mean,
yeah.
Oh yeah, no. Well, be careful when you run into a true believer, because that's the thing, folks. There are people out there who really are true believers. So
That's
whether
true.
it's on the street or it's on a keyboard, you never know who you're really talking to.
No.
And you never know who you're really dealing with.
Well,
and
you know
that's
what's
something to think about, seriously.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there have been some cases where people have gone after someone thinking that they were invincible, and it turns out they weren't. There's a case out of Florida where a guy basically was in this road rage incident going after an Uber driver and essentially cuts the Uber driver off, gets in front of him, comes out with his cell phone, pretends it's a gun, and whoops, the Uber driver was a police officer that just, had gone through training, and he shot and killed the guy, even though the guy just had a cell phone. But, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, you do have to be careful what you say and who you talk to, and there is something to be said for decorum when having conversations with people, no matter what profession you're in, because I have learned over and over again that facts do not change people's opinions at the outset. Like, there's that, the phrase, facts don't care about your feelings, but I really believe feelings also do not care about your facts. And the only way to change someone's mind is start building a relationship with them and gather a trust amongst yourselves, and then use that trust to start having some conversations that otherwise you wouldn't have. You just throw facts at somebody, they don't know you. That's just not going to change anything. It creates a lot of animosity.
That's an interesting point you make, because trust and truth, and I could be wrong about the etymology of this, but those two words kind of come from the same root. But there's a big difference between trust and truth. And when it comes to trust, like when I spent time in the military, we would have people. It was a melting pot. That was the one thing about the Marine Corps that, like, one of the many things that everybody was so proud of about being a Marine is that you considered yourself to be a part of a melting pot. We had black guys. We had dudes literally from Mexico, Hispanic guys. We had guys from all walks of life. I had a guy on my team. He wasn't even a U.S. citizen. He was British, and before we deployed and went to Iraq, I was like, no, you're going to get your citizenship, dude, because if you're going to fight for a country and possibly die for it, you're going to get all of the things that come with being a citizen of that country, if you want it, of course. So, I've seen South Africans, Australians, like across the board, all kinds of different people from different walks of life. And guys too who were trying to get away from stuff. I had guys in my platoons that were gang members and were trying to change their stars, so to speak. And so when you get around that kind of a different melting pot of people, you're not going to get along. You're going to have disagreements. But the thing is there's trust there to that at the end of the day, I got your back, you got mine. And one of the greatest things I remember seeing, we were somewhere deployed, I won't say where, but me and a couple of guys, and we got into some stuff, and one dude was a Crip, and one dude was a Blood. And you know what? Those dudes fought for each other. There was no animosity there. So I think that dialogue that you're talking about is key to, like, there has to be open opportunity to have a conversation, or you're going to get nowhere. You're just going to be angry your whole life.
And you guys all had a common purpose, which is part of, I think, the issue too. The less intimate our relationships are, the less vested we are in the best interest and the outcome of another person's life, and we don't have common goals together. So I think there's a lot going on in today's world, but if our relationships are superficial because they're only based on social media, or we always say, like, moving into this Airstream, and we were really lucky. Like, our neighbor Minu, she's in some of our videos. She just got her U.S. citizenship. She's lived here for like 30 years, but she just got her U.S. citizenship. She's from India originally, and we talk to her every day. We have dinner with her all the time, and we have very different views on a lot of different stuff, but we know Minu. We know Minu beyond her politics. We know Minu beyond her house. We know Minu for a lot of different reasons, and
we love Minu.
And so, like, we're able to talk about this stuff because we know Minu. But if you don't know someone and you're just like arguing constantly, and you don't start from like, let's just start learning who the guy is next door instead of trying to take on 100 people on Facebook. I mean, like, keyboard warriors, put down your fingers and walk across the street and have dinner with your neighbor. And you don't have to move into an Airstream like we are, but like, our goal here is that if we can minimize the materialism, maybe we can maximize the relationships. And hey, maybe it's just us and we end up dying on our prepper plantation, but
goodness gracious.
Our ranch, our what do you call it? The zombie apocalypse. We'll be ready
Taliban,
for that.
Zombie Antifa apocalypse.
Yeah, but so we may this will be our last video, and who knows? But maybe it'll end up being a good thing, and we can encourage other people to have real. I mean, if you can't just do the very basic thing, which is like have dinner with somebody, then what's the hope for America? But that was the whole point of America, being able to have dinner with whoever you wanted to, right? And
then there's a big difference too between like a moral turpitude and just I disagree with your standpoint on something. I mean, if there's a moral turpitude issue there, and so then it goes back to the definition, the etymology of it. Like, what is depravity? How do you define that? And so, but I don't know what I don't know. I have to be, to a certain degree, open to at least having to hearing something out. And believe me, if I got on my computer every time I was offended by something I saw on TV or heard on the street or whatever, then I would probably never leave the house. I'd always be on the keyboard. So, to me, I kind of take some of that stuff with a grain of salt. I know what's important. I know what's things to be excited about, what things aren't to be excited about. And then the other side of it is I've got opinions. My opinions about a lot of different things, but those are my opinions. And just because I have the right, thank God we live in a country where my right to free speech is protected in a lot of cases by myself, and anybody else can protect their own right to speech. Thank God we live in a country like that. But just because I have that right doesn't mean I need to exercise that right. I can have my opinion, I can have my say about something, but I don't necessarily need to take it so far as I have to always have my way. That's not life.
Well, you, I guess, have to ask what your end game is. And, like, with us, and maybe this is end game, end the video, we'll end it here, but Lynn and I are both extroverts, so put us together and we'll just keep talking until the sun rises. Yeah, well, we hope we'll have cows someday. But, you got to ask where your end game is, and hopefully you have a system of values that check your own personal self-interest. And that forces you to create spaces for other people. And I cover the environment, for instance, so the planet and all kinds of stuff that's not just about you. And then you end up using your free speech for that greater purpose, not just for whatever, just for you. It's a gift to be used for the giver, I guess, to help others and to make your community a better place, not just for necessarily self-fulfillment. All right. Anything else about bias you'd like to share, Lynn?
No, but I would like to throw a shout out to Pop.
Oh, yeah.
Today is my dad's birthday. He
Yeah.
would have been 79 today.
Lynn Sr.
Lynn Sr.
He passed away 2 years ago. About 2 years ago.
2016.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
there aren't many guys out there named Lynn who can pull it off, but Lynn Sr. and Lynn Jr. are two.
Lynn Sr. pulled it off. He was the best. So
Yeah.
miss you, Dad. But so I haven't really kind of talked about that at all today, even you. But yeah, I miss him. So
Yeah.
but don't forget. I would say don't forget where you came from.
Don't forget to tell your loved ones that you love them. You never
Yeah.
know when it could be the last time you see them.
Well, and love does heal. So and maybe that's the best thing to end this one on is, hey, whatever your opinion, wherever you sit on certain things, like sometimes check the anger and all you need is love.
Do something to help someone.
Yeah.
Kill them with kindness.
Oh, there's that.
What do they say?
Bless your heart.
Bless your heart. Bless your heart, everyone.
Bless your heart.
We love you. See you next